Oh, hello. Um, we're a group of S6 students from Douglas Academy working with Gavin for the Mark Scott Leadership for Life Award. We'll be joined by three guest speakers tonight. Andy Ashcroft from Cool Schools, John Riches from Gavin's Mill, and Diana Bailey. This year's event will be focused on global warming and its effect on fair trade farming. If you don't know what fair trade is, it works with businesses and consumers. Fair trade ensures farmers and workers have an equal say in everything they do. They work hard across the world, particularly in the global south, where they ensure workers' rights are protected, giving equal and fair opportunities to farmers and workers. Fair trade works to increase standards of living and reduce risk and vulnerability for farmers and workers. The main way they ensure this is including the payment of the fair trade minimum price. The fair trade minimum price provides a safety net for farmers, which means they are less vulnerable to price volatility. Environmental protection is a key element of fair trade's view of sustainability, and fair trade standards promote training for farmers, which can include advice on switching to environmentally friendly practices. This has been shown to lead to good agricultural practices, which has encouraged environmentally sustainable production. The COVID-19 pandemic has also impacted on fair trade farming, and the pandemic has had severe economic effects all around the globe, including falling crop prices. The price of tea dropped by 40% due to import restrictions put in place by some of the world's biggest buyers, devastating an already very fragile industry. The pandemic also caused a loss of markets, like in Africa, where soon after the pandemic, flower farms were exporting less than a third of their daily production to Europe, even though it makes up 70% of their export market. Most of these farmers live in vulnerable communities without the financial safety nets that we are privileged enough to have. According to the Kenya Flower Council, 90% of Kenya's flower workers have been affected by either losing their job, receiving less income, or working less hours. In April 2020, an estimated £300,000 was being lost to the industry every day as a direct result of the COVID-19 pandemic. These farmers are also already dealing with inadequate healthcare, water and sanitation that comes from living in extreme poverty.
So how does climate change fit into this? These farmers have actually told Fairtrade that climate change is the biggest challenge they face right now. Climate change means that farmers experience late rains, floods, unusual droughts, damaging winds, unprecedented high temperatures, which it is worth noting that for some crops like coffee, even the slightest increase in temperature can devastate the crop. It can also cause more plant diseases and loss of fertile land, as a lot of these farmers live in areas that are very prone to climate-related disasters, like hurricanes. These are some very worrying and very real predictions that by 2050, adverse climate conditions will trigger drastic decline in banana yields in 10 countries. The changing climate may mean that up to 50% of the global surface area used for coffee farming is no longer suitable, and rising temperatures mean that many of the cocoa growing regions in Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire, where over half the world's cocoa is produced, will simply become too hot to grow the crop. So, how can Fairtrade help? Fairtrade brings farmers together into cooperatives. They support producers to organise themselves into farmer cooperatives, helping them to improve their negotiating position in the global supply chain, helping them to negotiate a better price for their crop. They also ensure a minimum price for their crops for when the market might fail them, and they also provide extra money in the form of fair trade premiums, which the farmers have full control of. With fairer pay, these farmers are more able to deal with the challenges they face due to climate change and are able to spend their money on things like diversifying their crops. So if a crop fails due to disease or unpredictable weather, they still have other crops to earn income from. And they're also able to put money aside for when disasters hit, which are becoming more common due to climate change. So I'm now going to pass you over to Maggie and our speakers.
Hi guys. So first of all, we are going to welcome our first speaker, Andy, who is the co-founder of the Fairtrade school uniform company, Cool Schools. So Cool Schools works to provide ethical, fair trade, eco-friendly school uniforms. So Andy, if you'd like to get started on your presentation.
I'd like to share my screen.
Yeah, of course.
Well, that's
Yeah,
coming up.
looks great.
I'll set
Okay,
my stopwatch to 10 minutes. Good evening, everybody. So my name's Andy, and I'm a co-founder of the Fairtrade school uniform company, Cool Schools. I should just say at this point that all the photos that you're going to see are pretty much most of the photos you're going to see about from the cotton farms and the factories tonight were taken during our last visit to India in December of 2019. Obviously, not too long before COVID happened, and obviously we've not been able to visit since then. So Cool Schools has been going for about 10 years. We founded the company on the back of a dream, really, in arguably one of the toughest fair trade commodities, in the sense that fair trade cotton has probably been one of the least successful fair trade commodities. And I'll show you a slide in a second which kind of explains why, because a clothing manufacturing chain is so big, so long, has so many factories and so many different kind of elements to it. And every single one of those elements has to be fair trade license and has to perform as fair trade and meet fair trade minimum standards. And so it's quite a challenge. It's quite a challenge to establish a fair trade clothing chain, and quite a challenge to maintain a clothing chain, as I'll tell you now. Our history is basically in two parts. So the first 6 years of our business, we worked out of Mauritius with a wonderful factory called Craft Aid. And Craft Aid, for example, used to supply companies, bigger corporates, like, for example, the Body Shop. Unfortunately, in 2016, around about the time that we were able to bring fair trade investment into our business, Craft Aid went under. And we were casting around. We tried to keep the business going in Mauritius for a couple of years, but the supply issues became too difficult. And we were lucky enough to keep a friendship with an old friend called Ranga, who used to be the fair trade cotton product manager at the Fairtrade Foundation. And Ranga very much came to our rescue. We started working again with Ranga in 2018, and thus we're able to keep our fair trade ethical supply chain going. So it wasn't easy. That middle two photos there, as you can see, never easy to persuade our families that we were going to Mauritius and India strictly on business. So two elements to our business. Educating, we take that very, very seriously. We don't see much point in the students wearing a fair trade cotton mark in their garments if they don't understand why the school has made an ethical clothing choice. So we do fair trade assemblies, class sessions, anything really to do with fair trade education in schools. We talk to parents groups, we talk to PTAs, and we have pass-coded lesson plans on our website. We also, the second element of our business is the clothing itself. So it's very important for us that we have good quality, affordable uniform. We realized at the start of the business that we weren't going to be able to match supermarket prices and so on. So quality was always very important for us, and touch wood, we've always been able to maintain that quality throughout the history of our business, thankfully. This is a slide I like to put up when I'm doing my assemblies and class sessions with students, because, and here I'm not trying to get a record number of photos on an individual slide, I promise you, but it gives you an idea of the complexity of the supply chain. So we start with the fair trade cotton. That whole process, producing and harvesting the cotton takes between 6 and 8 months. The cotton then goes to a ginning factory where it's cleaned. It then goes to a spinning factory where it's spun into yarn. Then it goes to a knitting factory where, in our case, it's mixed with recycled polyester. It's knitted with recycled polyester. Then it goes to a dyeing factory, and then finally to what we call a CMT factory, cut, make and trim. So you've got the two main elements of a clothing chain there. You've got obviously the cotton production. 70% of our clothes are made with cotton, but sadly only probably less than 1% of our cotton clothes carry the fair trade mark. There are all sorts of horror stories, true ones, I fear, about the plight of cotton farmers in developing countries. The basic equation is that there are many developed countries that subsidize their cotton farmers. Two of the big, more developed countries, or richer countries, if you like, that subsidize their cotton farmers are America and China. And what that does is, because rich countries are subsidizing their farmers, it pushes global prices down. So cotton farmers in developing countries are always playing catch up and find it very, very difficult to gain a fair price for their crops. And so sadly, over the last 20 years, more than 250,000 Indian cotton farmers have committed suicide because of the fluctuating global cotton price. So they'll plant their cotton harvest seeds at the start of the season, okay, and the cotton price will be at a certain level. And then by the time they come to harvest and they sell their cotton, that cotton price has tanked. It's gone through the floor. And so many farmers are left in a very desperate situation. And that, unfortunately, is one of the ongoing global tragedies that is virtually never supported. On the other side, you've obviously got the factories. This is a massive industry. Just to give you an idea, that middle photo on the left, where you see the gentleman, that's Jambu, who's the manager of our factory down in Tirupur in Tamil Nadu state in India. That he's standing there in the dyeing factory. When we were driving for the first time in 2014 down to Tirupur to see this great big textile city, population of about probably getting on for 3 million people, Jambu and Ranga, who's the CEO of our factory chain, they asked me, guess how many factories there are in this city, just to give you an idea of the size of the global textiles industry. And so, it's one of those questions where you think you're going to make a fool of yourself. So I thought, well, I'll go the high end of the guess. So I said, oh, well, what about 400? So they smiled at each other and they said, put a naught on that. 4,000 textiles factories in that city. And I'm not talking about small operations here. I'm talking about factories with 1, 2, 3,000 employees. Okay, so it just gives you an idea of what a vast industry it is. There were 5 factories in that city of Tirupur just manufacturing wristbands for Nike. Okay, so it's such a big industry. So what about traceability and impact of our business then? Very important for us. We have total traceability in our India supply chain, going back to individual marginalized cotton farmers where in Telangana in India, they produce our Fairtrade organic cotton. And it's farmers from that region in Telangana, you see on the map there, that produce all of the Fairtrade organic cotton for this year's Fairtrade school uniform order. Fairtrade school uniform and corporate uniform, and we also supply universities as well. So being part of a fair trade chain gives us a reassurance that no farmers or factory workers are being unfairly treated or unfairly paid in the making of our fair trade clothing. Our Debella factory pays a bonus to the cotton farmers to maintain organic farming practices. This helps to avoid the usage of GMO seeds, which are proven to push farmers into an irrevocable debt cycle. Organic farming avoids the use of harmful pesticides, and in India, cotton farming accounts for 54% of pesticide consumption, whereas only 5% of arable land is used for cotton farming. There are 2 gentlemen in that photo, apart from the bold-headed Cool Schools representative, that photo bottom right there, and they're absolutely pivotal to our business and the existence of our business. On the left is Ranga, who's the CEO of our factory chain in India, and in the middle is Aaron Ambatipudi. And Aaron is a co-founder of an NGO in India called Chetna. They work exclusively with cotton farming communities in 4 states in India, cotton farming communities that are marginalized. And over the last 17 years, they've been working with those cotton farmers to gradually turn what started off with a handful and now amounts to nearly 40,000 individual cotton farmers into organic farming, helping them, supporting them, financing them at the start of their journey and so on. So it's a wonderfully, wonderfully enthusiastic story. And just in case you're wondering, that mini mountain of Fairtrade organic cotton we're kneeling in front of there was most definitely not picked by us. We're just posing for the photo. So the other important thing to say here is that all the polyester that Belly uses in all of our garments is GRS recycled, the highest global recycled polyester clothing standards. So our supply chain works with our cotton farmers on the challenge of climate change. I've gone to 10 minutes, 7 seconds now. Maggie, I hope I'm okay to carry on for a couple more minutes.
Yeah, go for it. Go for it, Andy. Everybody's very interested.
Okay, I did tell you I would time it. Not very well, apparently. So these photos here of Mr. and Mrs. Atram from the Aliguda village in Telangana in India. These were taken on the 27th of November 2019, when I spent an incredibly busy, hot, sweaty, hard-working day picking cotton I wanted to join them and do, and experience what the cotton farmers experience on a daily basis during the busy harvest time. But I also realized that it was, it's hot, thirsty work. We were sat there. The middle photo was taken during a lunch break. We'd had about 3.5 hours of sweaty, hot cotton picking. You can see Mrs. Atram hasn't got a bead of sweat on her forehead. Well, I can assure you I was dripping myself. But it was a wonderful experience. And during the course of the day, I learned about some of the things that they are assisted by Chetna to do, which is low-till farming, which is low soil disturbance planting, cover cropping and green manure. And this is all, of course, designed to protect the soil and protect the planet, where they plant non-harvest plants that refertilize the soil between harvests. They do crop diversification and rotation, and they do intercropping. So there'll be a couple of rows of cotton, and then you will have food as well growing on the farm. So they're self-sustaining, and it's all organic. It's almost like the absolute epitome of what you would like to see in terms of organic farming. And I was also really impressed to see there's the evidence of an active recycling project going on in Aliguda as well. I had a great fun day with Mr. and Mrs. Atram, and we had lots of laughs, and it was hard work but good fun. But I kind of, on a serious note, I kind of came away feeling quite relieved, because I know what the situation is for cotton farmers in India that don't get paid a fair amount for what they produce year on year. And I know the tragic story of the cotton farming suicides and so on. So it's nice when you can spend some time with people that they don't want to be rich. What they want is to enjoy their lives, produce something, have meaningful lives, and get just a fair price for what they actually produce. And that is what fair trade is all about. That is the process that we're trying to help in business here in the UK, by making sure that everybody in our chain, factory workers, cotton farmers, are paid fairly for what they do. So that is going to be it from me. So unfortunately, I failed miserably, Maggie. That's 13 minutes and 11 seconds.
That is okay. We can forgive you, Andy. It was very, very interesting, and I'm excited to hear your responses to the questions when we get round to that.
Yep.
So thank you very much. I'm going to introduce John now. So if you would like to just mute and camera off. Hi, John. So John is a chairperson of the Gavin's Mill Community Project, and he's been deeply involved in fair trade for over 40 years. And he's going to talk to us a bit about his personal experiences with farmers who he's had direct contact with. So John, take it away.
Thank you. Yes, we got into fair trade by accident, really. My wife and I have been out in South Africa in the 70s during apartheid, working. My wife was working in a hospital in an area of extreme rural poverty. And we had a group of friends here in Baldona, and we decided we would open up a shop just to raise some money and do something, see if we could make an impact on this appalling poverty that we'd been exposed to. And so that's what we did. We sold anything we could sell, and we made a bit of money, and we gave it to hospitals and whatever. About 2 years in, a friend brought in a wonderful woman called Angela Gomez from Bangladesh. And she'd been working with women who'd been raped during the terrible wars of independence there, and who were living on the street. and being abused. And she'd organized 4,000 women into little groups. And they were self-help groups which were gradually working their way up. And I said to her, you know, we've got a trust, would it help if we gave you a grant for the work you're doing? And she looked at me straight in the eye and said, I don't want your money. I want you to sell the crafts that our women make, because that's what gives them their dignity. And these were people who were regarded as somehow untouchable in their society. But being able to make some beautiful craft work, take it, sell it, get some reward for that, be recognized as somebody who can really make a contribution, that's life transforming for people who are really downtrodden. So, I mean, I think that's at the heart of fair trade. Trade's a kind of relationship where people can meet on an equal basis. They've both got an interest. I want to buy from you. I need stuff to sell in my markets. They need a market. We help them make a market. They make beautiful things. It's a partnership, and it can be a partnership of equals. It can be a very exploitative partnership. But if it's a partnership of equals, it's something that gives people real hope and a sense of dignity. So we decided, okay, we'd got a shop, we would use it for fair trade. There wasn't a lot of fair trade around there. Tradecraft had just started, and we imported a bit ourselves. And then somehow in the early 20s, we had a letter from Swaziland, from a factory which makes wonderful jams and sauces. You see a few more behind my ear there. And this was a factory run by women to give work to women, but also to provide a market for farmers there, because that was very difficult. And it was just my wife and myself really doing it as a hobby, and it grew. And we in 2010, it had grown so much that we decided if we're going to do anything, we're going to have to open up a proper importing business. And we got a warehouse in Paisley, thanks to some friends, and that's where it took off. That year in Glasgow, there was an exhibition of Malawi, a trade fair for Malawi, and we met some amazing rice farmers from Malawi. They're part of a national association which has got 150,000 members. Their particular association, local association, had about 2,000, but as its numbers have gone up as they've got more markets and got more energy. And they work very closely together. And the fact that there are 5,000 of them gives them strength. We had never sold any rice. We'd been selling jams and marmalades and things like that. And they decided to send us a whole container of rice. And we thought, that's quite a challenge, actually. How do you sell a container of rice when you've never actually sold a grain of it before? I'd been out and talked to some of the farmers up in the north of Malawi, and I asked them, the rice was their cash crop, really. They don't eat a lot of rice, they grow maize. And they grew it, so they could pay the bills. If all you do is grow enough to eat, you can't pay even for oil for cooking. So I asked them what they did with it, and they said, oh, well, we use it for housing and for clothing and for transport, and we use it for education. And I asked them, how much rice do you have to sell to send one child to school? And there was long discussion in Chichewa. And eventually they said, well, 90 kilos. So while we were thinking what on earth to do, how are we going to sell all this rice, somebody, Liz Cotton, who was much involved in fair trade, said, why don't we challenge people to sell 90 kilos of this lovely Kilimanjaro rice? Here it is. Because, and let them know that if they sell that amount, that means that a farmer is going to have enough income to be able to send his child to school. And that's been enormously effective. Schools, churches, all sorts of groups have bought 90 kilos and sold it on to their friends. And that really drove it for a long time. Now we sell to Tradecraft and Oxfam and to other companies, but the beginnings were quite tough. Well, it's always tough, but it's fun. So we've got to know these farmers really well, and we've been able to get money from the Scottish government to help them develop their operations. And they have grown as an organisation. They've grown in confidence and strength, and certainly the partnerships we've built have made an enormous impact on them. If you go over there and then show a farmer their rice in a rather smart piece of packaging like that, that's a sort of a real experience, that they see their rice is on supermarket shelves or in nice shops in the UK. That's something beyond their wildest dreams, probably, and it gives them a lot of confidence. But now this gets to the climate change thing. Rice, of course, is very dependent on water. The Malawi farmers grow their rice it's all rain fed, so that they don't irrigate from rivers for the most part. If your field's next to a river, you can pump out. But most of them are waiting for the rain, and when the rains come, they dig their fields. Before that, they can't. They're baked so hard it doesn't make any sense. But once the first rains come, they dig their fields. They plant rice seedlings in the nursery, and then when they've grown a bit, they plant them out, and then they keep growing for the next 4 or 5 months, and they need the fields to be wet. So you need a rainy season. And what's happening more and more is they're changing patterns of rainfall. They're not sure when the growing season has started, and so on. And if the rice doesn't get some sort of water at particular crucial periods, then it's likely not to do very well over the time. So we've been thinking and working with them quite hard how to deal with this. And I just want to say a few things they've done. The first thing actually is something they've done to try and cut down the damage that even they are doing to it's pretty small, the damage they're doing to the environment, but they are, they have to go, they get fuel for cooking food, and they go into the forest and cut down trees, and that's certainly not good. So what we've got now, 2 groups of women who are just setting up some small workshops to turn the rice husks, which you get from milling, together with some offcuts from carpentry stores, to turn those into briquettes so that people can use those for cooking. It's going to provide an income for the women, and it's giving them a great sense of achievement and self-worth. The wonderful photos coming now. And it's going to help actually stop people going to the farmers, which has become illegal meanwhile. The other thing, some of the other things they're doing, we've got some money from the Scottish government. They've started digging wells and looking at water stewardship. How do you manage water? They're using solar pumps to pump out of the wells, which are very successful. And they're learning about how to deal with the pressures on the rivers and the water systems that come from excess rain, flooding, big damage to the river banks. And what we're going to look at now is a video we just got the other day. We didn't ask for it. Howard, one of our big friends among the farmers, took it, just showing what they've been doing to try and protect their river banks and to manage the water better. There's lots more we could talk about, but they're really an active group trying hard to deal with the effects of climate change. So Maggie, if you could show the video now. This is Howard Masukwa, who's the chair of the organization.
Right, let me just get that up. 2 seconds.
Thank you very much.
No problem. Is that, everybody see that okay?
Yep, that's it.
Great. Okay, we'll put this on. Oh gosh. Oh gosh, okay.
There's
2 seconds, I need to share the audio. Share sound. Okay.
Decided to plant
Oh, no,
trees
this is yours.
to protect the riverbanks. But since the river has 2 sides, the community on the other side of the river trees along the riverbank, it means they are giving away the land on which they are supposed to plant their crops for food. It was like being realistic, but 8 years down the ladder, it's now the other way around. Because as you can see, the crops are being taken because the riverbanks are just being, when they get soaked, the soil is being washed away by the river, taking in even the plants. The ones which you can see on top is maize stalks, the plants of maize which the people planted. So the soil and the maize are being washed away by the river when it's full. But when I show you on the other side of the same river, where people agreed to plant trees, it's a different thing altogether. And as you can see from here, these are reeds which the people decided to plant close to the river, and then they planted trees. So this time it's like a forest. It's a forest indeed, where water have got no strength to damage the riverbanks anymore. So when we are talking about combating climate change, we are talking about replanting trees in bare land, so that when these trees grow, there is some natural force to hold the soil back. So this time, the area around this area, the people around this area are no longer afraid that their land will be washed away or their crops will be destroyed in any way, because these trees are protecting the environment now. So combating effects of climate change need a lot of community participation, need a lot of awareness, and need a lot of support. Because suppose we are saying this community is ready to protect the riverbanks through planting trees, you find that the other alternative, the other problem would be they cannot source the seedlings. Sometimes you go to the forest department, you find that they have none, unless you meet some supportive NGOs, then they provide you with the seed, because it's not any tree that you can plant, because some trees take a long time before they get really fitted into the soil. But these trees I'll show you are trees which when you plant, they don't take very long. The ones I'll show you deeply when I'm in the forest there, they're just about 8 years old. But what they're doing now is very impressive to the community.
Great. It's great to hear from people who are actually being affected. John, are you still there?
Yes.
Great. That's an incredibly interesting video, actually. It's not something you think about a lot when we're talking about fair trade and climate change, I think.
No, it impressed me, and they had, they'd had quite a lot of help and guidance about how to deal with climate and water management, and not all of the farmers sort of bought into planting trees. I guess, they thought it was going to take up land that they could use for planting crops. But as Howard was saying in that video, that's a short-term view, because if the land then gets washed away and eroded, you actually lose the land anyway.
Mm-hmm.
So these are kind of measures that it requires a certain sort of foresight and being able to look forward. But people like Howard have got real vision, and they're the leaders who are encouraging them to do this.
Mm-hmm. That's great. Thank you so much, John. That was really interesting. And I look forward to hearing more about it if people have questions in the chat. So thank you. And I'm going to welcome Diana now. So Diana, if you'd like to turn on your camera and your mic. Diana has had an international career in education and development, and she's very interested in environmental issues. And she's worked with companies such as Oxfam. She's worked with Commonwealth agencies. And she's currently part of Extinction Rebellion, and she's going to tell us a bit about her work and her life. So you can start.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Can I start by saying that I believe that the climate and ecological crisis is the greatest moral issue facing humankind at this time. Nobody I know would now condone slavery, nor would they support depriving women of the vote. And in my view, pursuing climate justice is comparable to the great movements of the abolitionists in the 18th century and of the suffragettes in the 19th century. So can I congratulate the young people from Douglas Academy who have organized this session on climate justice. Take my word for it, you're on the right side of history. I'm not a scientist, but I have always believed the climate scientists who've warned us that the rise in global temperatures over the past century has mainly been caused by greenhouse gases pumped into the atmosphere by human beings. And these have included carbon dioxide emissions from the burning of fossil fuels to power our homes, our factories, and our transport systems. We surely must all be aware by now about the climate crisis has intensified in the past decade at an alarming rate. These days, natural disasters resulting from man-made climate change come thick and fast. Hurricanes and typhoons, drought and forest fires, floods and receding glaciers, melting ice and rising sea levels. We are all affected by this, rich and poor, but it is the world's poorer countries which are more vulnerable to climate change, and it's the poorest people in the world who bear the brunt of these disasters and in future will suffer the full force of this emergency. So why is this? Now let me try and explain very briefly and simply what I think climate justice means. The existing divide between rich and poor countries has historical roots. Over a period of 500 years, countries in Europe used their superior knowledge and technology in seamanship and warfare to conquer much of the rest of the world. They set up a global economic system which persists to this day, whereby they extracted raw natural resources from their colonies, which they brought to Europe and became the basis of our wealth and industrial expansion. Slaves, for instance, in the sugar plantations of the Caribbean and the cotton and tobacco plantations of North America, labored to produce these crops for the European market. Slavery has mercifully been abolished, but the historic legacy of colonialism has been an unbalanced global trade system, which has continued to benefit rich countries and their multinational companies and has inhibited the economic development of poorer countries in the global south. Because rich countries, mainly in Europe and North America, have a longer tradition and greater concentration of industrial activity, historically, they have been responsible for a far greater proportion of greenhouse gas emissions than countries in the global south. And thus they bear a disproportionate responsibility for the current climate emergency. As a result, countries in the global south have demanded that in the interests of justice, the industrial countries should reduce their emissions further and faster. They also want richer countries to provide financial support for their own efforts to adapt to the effects of the climate crisis, as we've seen in John's video, and to adopt greener technologies. And if we are serious about achieving climate justice, that is what we should be doing. For much of my career, I worked in international development, and I was incredibly fortunate and privileged to work with some very impressive and charismatic environmental leaders. I also saw firsthand innovative grassroots projects around the Commonwealth, tree planting in Kenya with the Green Belt movement, resource management for small island states of the Caribbean, and the training of rural women at the Barefoot College in India, where they were taught to install and operate solar panels in their villages. This encouraging professional experience buoyed me up, and it was only after I retired in 2003 that I fully realized the urgency of the climate crisis. Hence, I was glad to be involved in the Big Ask campaign of Friends of the Earth, which contributed to the passing of the UK's Climate Change Act in 2008, the first in the world, and which was followed by an even more ambitious act in Scotland. But in the past decade, I have watched with some distress the glacial pace of our efforts to tackle global heating at personal, national, and international level. Individuals have remained indifferent. Corporations and fossil fuel companies have continued to put profit before planet. National governments are either in denial or have been too timid to act, and nation states have squabbled among themselves instead of collaborating. Then, 2 years ago, the International Panel on Climate Change published a stark report. This stated that the world only had 12 years left to curb our emissions of greenhouse gases by half in order to have any prospect of restricting the global temperature rise to 1.5 degrees centigrade. And 1.5 degrees is the magical figure, based on scientific fact, for averting the worst ravages of global heating and irreversible climate change. Yet our emissions are still going up rather than down, and we now have less than 10 years. That's scary. But there are reasons for optimism. Let me just give you a few. First, there has been a rapid improvement and a reduced cost of the technology needed for developing renewable sources of energy. Second are the campaigns led by the school strikers, good on you, I say, and Extinction Rebellion, of which I am a member, and we are not terrorists, say I. Both these movements have massively raised awareness of urgent climate and ecological issues. Third, in this country is the burgeoning movement for local councils to declare a state of climate emergency, with the UK Parliament following suit. And fourth, most recently, the election of Joe Biden as President of the United States, who is taking the climate emergency seriously. Hooray! In November of this year, Glasgow will take centre stage because a major UN conference known as COP26 and crucial to the global fight against the climate emergency will be held there. This is part of a process which was initiated in 1992 after another UN conference known as the Earth Summit and held in Rio de Janeiro. Since 1995, representatives of member countries of the UN have met every year, apart from last year because of the pandemic, to assess progress in dealing with climate change. Their negotiations are painfully slow. But 6 years ago in Paris, there was a major breakthrough at COP21 when 196 nations signed the Paris Agreement, a legally binding international treaty on climate change, which aimed to limit the global temperature rise to the essential limit of 1.5%. 2 years ago, Greta Thunberg closed her remarks to the UN Conference on Climate Change in Madrid by saying that we have to maintain a balance between outrage and optimism, anger to fuel our fight, but optimism that people do have the power to bring about change. I agree with that. And it's important that we're optimistic about the outcome of the COP26 in Glasgow. We cannot fail then. Barack Obama spoke famously of the audacity of hope, and we all must have the courage of hope. Yes, we can. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Diana. That was so interesting. And I feel flattered that you think that we can do this. And yeah, I have faith too. So thank you to all our speakers. That was really, really good. We're going to have a Q&A session now. So if our speakers would like to come back and put their mics and their cameras on, and I'll invite my friend Harry, who will be moderating the Q&A. So he'll answer your questions in chat. There he is.
Thank you. Those are some really interesting presentations there. We're going to go through some questions. I see we already have a few, and Andrew has gone through and answered a few of them, but it would be useful if we could answer them here as well, if that is okay. So we'll go through a few of them. So first one here I see is from Alison Reeve, and this is for John. What do you think individuals should be doing to help? Clearly we can buy fair trade, but what else can we do to help with the...
Yeah, I think buying fair trade is really, really important, and becoming part of a network of people who are involved in this. So I mean, JTS, which imports, has actually quite a broad network of people. And if you get on their website, you'll find out more that you can do. You'll find out more about what farmers are doing that you can support and encourage. I mean, they're coming up with quite a lot of ideas at the moment. So, and again, you know, Gavin's Mill, volunteer there and you'll get more involved. It is about really rich partnerships and helping people meet, and in all the ways you can do. I mean, I get WhatsApps from Howard virtually every day, full of photographs. I could have shown you lots. And we can pass on that and help people to get more involved. I think getting to know more what's happening the other side is a really important part of that. And that's something through the mill, through JTS, we can manage.
Thank you. That was, I think, quite a good answer there. So we'll move on to another question. So a few of them that have already been answered by Andrew. As I said, if we could answer them live, that'd be quite good as well, just for everyone's, so they don't have to go through and read them. So there was one here from Margaret Mackay, and she asked, how many schools in the UK does Cool Schools supply?
So we've probably got about over 100 commercial information, confidential commercial information coming out here. I'm just joking. It's probably over about 150 schools that we now supply in different ways. Some schools we exclusively supply, but most schools around the UK, including most schools that we supply in Scotland, we supply online in parallel with other suppliers. And we try and encourage those schools that look as though they're fair trade friendly and like the concept of fair trade uniform, and like the concept that we can come and talk to students and so on. So making our uniform good quality, and sometimes it's a little bit more expensive, but not always. And that's very important, so that we can say to the schools, well, if our school uniform is at least on a par quality wise, is not more expensive, and carries a fair trade cotton mark and recycled polyester, why would you at least not give your students an ethical clothing choice? So that's kind of quite a difficult question for a fair trade friendly school to answer negatively. So we try and make it as difficult for schools as we can to say no. I'm talking now to an Edinburgh school, and congratulations, guys, on a wonderful initiative tonight. Outside of Southampton, our home city, Edinburgh is actually our largest market for fair trade uniform in the UK. The number of schools we supply in Edinburgh is well into double figures. I think it's getting on for 20 schools now, actually, around Edinburgh. So there's a bit of a revolution going on in your neck of the woods, I'm pleased to say. We wish it was 100 schools, but getting towards 20. So, and I spend quite a lot of my time, my sales and marketing time, actually traveling around Scotland every year, particularly during Fairtrade Fortnight. So this is quite novel for me not to be in your neck of the woods actually this year.
Thank you. And we've just got a question for Diana in regards to the COP conference this year. And Margaret Morrison asks, what kind of outcomes are you hoping from this conference?
Well, in the Paris conference, which was considered one of the most successful of these conferences, the nations that signed up to the Paris Agreement agreed that they would go back to their own countries and set targets for cutting carbon emissions, greenhouse gas emissions in their countries. And I think the main purpose of the Glasgow conference is for those countries to come back with revised targets, which are more in line with the current scientific knowledge about how climate change has developed. The fact is that even a few years ago, when the big UN reports on climate change were produced, people didn't realize how fast this emergency was going to develop. And what is needed now is much more ambitious targets from countries around the world. I mean, the tragic thing about this is that we've known about climate change for 30, 40 years, and people just have not acted. And so now we've got to act really fast in the next 10 years if we're going to have any hope of meeting the 1.5% target. I hope that answers the question.
Thank you. I'm sure it did. It was really insightful. Now there was another one which which Andrew answered, but I thought it was an interesting question. And San Brewer asks, is it difficult when expanding the group fair trade farmers, or is it just a thing where farmers opt in? If there is, what's stopping you from including everyone? And there's no one specifically, that's not specifically naming anyone, but if anyone would like to comment on that.
I can certainly comment from a fair trade cotton farmer's perspective. I think farmers in India generally would love fair trade to be something that they could opt into. But the reason why, if you remember when I was talking on that slide with lots of photos, cotton farmers don't produce in general, as a general rule, on fair trade terms, because less than 1% of the clothes, the cotton clothes that we can buy, carry the fair trade cotton mark. And that means that when you drill down to the India countryside, I remember the very first visit that we made to our very first cotton farm in India in 2014. And it was a fair trade cooperative. We went to the village hall and we had a meeting with the cotton farmers, and they said to us, the first thing they said to us, we are really lucky in this community, and we realize, because there are literally tens of thousands of farmers in this area, and they're literally banging the doors down to us to become members of our fair trade cotton cooperative. But you remember that I said that fair trade cotton is one of the least successful fair trade commodities. So it's actually the fact that the demand for fair trade cotton is not there. So developed country clothing companies do not ask for fair trade cotton, and the reason for that is that they, by and large, they make pretty hideous profit margins on their clothing. I mean, eye-watering margins. We're talking about fast fashion here. We're talking about fast-moving clothing and so on and so forth. So they're not prepared to sacrifice what actually is a fairly small amount of profit margin to make the effort to buy their cotton on fair trade terms. If we can do it as a small business, grow a small business in 10 years and bring good quality products to market and still grow a small business with, it's not within our ethics to make a big profit margin. Obviously, we make a small profit margin, but enough to grow our business. But if we can do it, imagine what the big corporates could do if they make an effort. So I come back to the first question that was asked to John, and I would say to you, young people, when you go shopping and when you look for clothes and when you go into, Fat Face or wherever you go, ask the managers in the shops, why don't you produce your cotton clothes with fair trade cotton? And that comes back to a point that our factory manager was making in our webinar on Wednesday. He made a plea to everybody listening. Please, everybody today, think of doing one or two things that you can do in your lives, on an ongoing basis that can make a tiny difference. And if we all do that same thing. So, every time you go clothes shopping, ask the manager in the shop, why, where does this cotton come from in this garment? Why is this not recycled polyester? Those are the things I think we can do as active consumers of the future.
Thank you. Now we're just going to answer, I think, one more question, and we're going to stop the Q&A just because we've been going on for, we were a bit over our schedule, but we're going to answer this one question here from Jill Patterson. And they ask, what else can the Scottish Government / Parliament do to promote fair trade uniforms and supply to schools?
Well, the answer to that is, I wish there was more government support throughout the UK, including in Scotland, to promote fair trade uniforms. Unfortunately, it comes down to, when I say unfortunately, they do a great job, but it comes down to fair trade campaign groups. But if you had a government initiative leading it, it would make a huge difference. I think it may happen one day, because how long can we go on with these horror stories of cotton farmer suicides and sweatshop factories, and so on. So one day a government somewhere is going to say, right, and you know, from our point of view, fantastic if it were to be Scotland. Scotland is a fair trade nation, and you know, a great candidate for such a policy, I think.
Thank you. Now I think we're going to go and show you a video and then move on to the conclusion of the event. Maggie will.
Yeah, I have the video lined up. So thank you so much for everyone's questions in chat. That was amazing. I'm sorry we couldn't get to them all, though. Sorry, we're running a little bit over time.
Yeah.
Okay, if everybody would like to turn off their cameras and mute themselves, I will share the video. Okay, let me just.
Have you ever stopped to think of what it takes to make a great cup of coffee? Coffee farming is hard work, but it's getting even tougher because of the climate emergency. Higher temperatures, droughts, floods, and more crop diseases ruin harvests and affect the farmers and their families who rely on the income. With Fairtrade, farmers get a fair price. That means we can work together to tackle poverty and climate change. You can help too. As well as choosing Fairtrade, you can campaign and tell your MP and MSPs to take action on trade to respond to the climate emergency. Wake up and smell the coffee? We need to wake up to the climate emergency. We must change the way we do business and trade to protect people and our planet.
Yeah, so thank you for joining us this evening, everyone. I would just now like to give a special thanks to Lily and Veronica, who have been working on this event behind the scenes, Liz Ibbotson from Gavin's Mill, who's been helping us to plan the event, and Dave Adams from the Outward Bound Trust, who's been our project coordinator for the Mark Scott Leadership for Life Award, for which we have been working towards, and he's been supporting us throughout this process, and also to Ross from the Fairtrade Foundation for helping us to get speakers and stuff. So as you leave us tonight, if you're wondering about, you know, things you can do to help, first of all, obviously, when you can, just consider buying fair trade so that you can give these farmers more profit so they can deal with the effects of climate change. We encourage you to email your members of parliament, your local councillors to continue to push for change in the governmental policies to do with climate change, as really we are the ones who have caused these problems for these farmers and now they are the ones suffering. And yeah, once again, thank you for joining us this evening. We hope you enjoyed it, maybe learned a thing or two, but we hope you have a wonderful rest of your evening. And yeah, thank you for joining us.